Hi everyone, and welcome to this lecture on nutrition and disease. For this lecture, we're just going to go through actually very few, only four major diseases in the United States, and look at both, first we'll look at very basic pathophysiology, meaning what does the disease look like inside of the body, what's actually happening at the biochemical level, but again, very basic overview we'll do in this lecture. And then we'll spend a little bit more time looking at some of the possible and probable and known dietary causes of these diseases. And then we'll look at nutritional means for preventing the disease and treating, and in some cases even reversing the disease once the disease has occurred. So we'll start off just by listing some of the leading causes of death in the United States that are related to diet. So we have these 7 that are listed here are 7 of the top 10 leading causes of death, and all of them we could say have a foundation in diet. Again, we're only going to spend time on 4 of them in this lecture, but of course, to the extent that you're interested, please feel free to research more about any one of these and find out more about how they are dietarily related and how they can be prevented, and in some cases either exceptionally well treated, if not reversed, through good nutrition and a healthy lifestyle overall. I'll also note that while diet is important, nutrition is very important, the lifestyle as a whole is really important to consider. So again, in this course, we're really focusing on nutrition, and I'll touch on some other lifestyle things briefly as we go through these slides, but it's really important to remember that the lifestyle as a whole is very impactful. So not just a healthful diet, but a healthful lifestyle. In general, that simply includes, well, simply to say, having adequate physical activity, so moving one's body, getting good exercise, getting productive sleep, and getting consistently productive sleep, so getting enough sleep as often as possible, and then of course managing stress. None of us are free of stress, but we all have obviously different ways of managing and dealing with stress, and so it's certainly been shown that when we can deal with our stress in healthful ways, we are at a much lower risk for developing or exacerbating some of these diseases. We're also not going to look very specifically at obesity, but I want to start off with obesity as it is a major risk factor for these other diseases that we're going to look at. This graphic is from 2018, just showing the prevalence of obesity in the United States. Of course, obesity is still rising, so these numbers are relatively accurate for where we are now in 2020, but certainly current numbers are probably a little higher. So obesity is not itself a leading cause of death, but as I said, obesity is definitely a risk factor for the 4 diseases that we're going to look at. We're going to look at heart disease, diabetes, and cancer, and then we'll also look at Alzheimer's disease. And then just some relatively recent statistics. So as of 2017-2018 census, 42.4% of Americans are obese, and 19% of young people are obese. And this is just obesity. When you also factor in overweight, that number is closer to the 60 to 70% range. So obviously, overweight is not obese, but it is moving in the direction of obese. And then just a few more statistics on chronic disease in general. So 6 out of 10 adults in the United States, again, this is about 2017-2018 data, have chronic disease. 4 in 10 adults in the United States have 2 or more chronic diseases. And collectively in the US, the healthcare that we spend or that these individuals spend, or that is spent to manage these diseases, is upwards of $3.5 trillion annually. That's quite an enormous sum of money. And these are healthcare costs. In the United States, nutrition isn't usually part of the healthcare system. So we're not talking about nutritional treatment or nutritional therapy. We're talking about drug therapies. We're talking about surgeries. We're talking about doctor's visits. I don't have data in this lecture, but it's a really interesting economic comparison to look at the money that hypothetically would be spent through a healthy diet and a healthy lifestyle to prevent disease compared to the amount of money spent on treating and managing disease. So managing isn't necessarily reversing, it's just living with. Typically, the estimates that I've seen when there are estimations of the cost that it would take to prevent diseases through healthy diet and lifestyle, it's a significant reduction in money spent. And then perhaps I've kind of alluded to this already, but the diseases that we're going to look at, and again, 7 of the top 10 leading causes of death in the United States are diseases of diet and lifestyle. And so 4 key lifestyle factors contribute to the development of all of these diseases, all or some. So tobacco use, poor nutrition, lack of physical activity, and excessive alcohol intake. There's just 4 lifestyle factors. And again, in some cases, the tobacco is not relevant, and in some cases, the alcohol is not relevant, or in some cases, also the lack of physical activity is not relevant. But certainly in all of these cases, one or more of these factors is relevant, and so could be addressed, again, as a preventive measure and certainly as a treatment measure. So what is poor nutrition? Just a couple of statistics on poor nutrition. Poor nutrition is also, we see it throughout the life cycle. So it's not just like somebody, in their 40s or 30s or 20s eating like hot dogs and French fries. Poor nutrition can start in the womb. So a mother who, it can start even before conception. 2 people who aren't leading healthful lifestyles, and then they get pregnant together, and then the woman carries the baby for 9 months. It is very important what the people are doing in terms of their own health prior to even conceiving. And then, of course, it's very important what a woman does while she carries a fetus and a developing baby over 9 months. And then, very important what that baby eats from the moment it's born. So, the quality of the breast milk, and then its first foods at 6 to 12 months of age. So we know that breast milk is one of the most nutritious, it is the most nutritious food available to infants. And in the United States, only 1 in 4 infants is actually exclusively breastfed through 6 months of age. One of kind of the more subtle themes you'll see throughout this lecture is sugar and refined grains, and just excessive sugar intake. A lot of, most in fact, bottle formulas, so if a mother chooses not to breastfeed, most bottle formulas have added sugar in them. And so we're already right out of the gate in infancy, a person can develop a very severe sugar addiction, which can take a lifetime to reverse and undo. So nutrition begins prior to conception and certainly becomes critical during pregnancy and upon birth. So where possible, if the mother is healthy, breastfeeding is the preferred and recommended source of nutrition for an infant from 0 to 6 months of age, and often even through the first year, if not into the second year of life. Although after 6 months, it would not be the exclusive food, as you'd want to begin introducing healthy real foods at about 6 months of age. There's also a major iron deficiency in the United States. 14% of young children and 16% of pregnant women are iron deficient. In the chronic diseases we're going to look at, we're not going to see iron deficiency as a contributing factor, but it's another example of poor nutrition starting early. Statistically, we know that fewer than 1 in 10 adults and fewer than 1 in 10 adolescents that should say eat enough fruits and vegetables. I'll see if I can change that before finalizing this. So 1 in 10 people, less than 1 in 10 people, is eating enough fruits and vegetables on a daily basis. And as you'll see throughout these slides, fruits and vegetables are, without a doubt, some of our most nutritionally dense foods. So foods that we definitely want to be eating to prevent disease and then to treat disease should it arise. And then just sort of going back to the sugar that's in bottle formulas for infants, 6 in 10 young people and about half of adults consume a sugary drink just about every day. Again, sugar addiction is a major problem in the United States and certainly contributing to excess caloric consumption, which leads to weight gain and obesity. And you'll see, as we saw in the previous slide, obesity being a major risk factor for the leading causes of death. And then on the whole, in the United States, the common diet in the US is very high in added sugars, coming from sugary drinks, coming from infant formulas, coming from processed foods, also high in sodium, saturated fats, cholesterol, and trans fats. And effectively, if these 5 food components can be managed, that's a very powerful step that we can each take to reducing our risk for these chronic diseases. Okay, so we're going to start with heart disease. So just a quick overview of what heart disease is. Again, we're not going to get into very intensive detail in the pathophysiology of any of these diseases, but in case you aren't familiar, worth having a brief overview. So heart disease itself is a broad term referring to several conditions that affect the functioning of the heart. The most common is coronary artery disease, which is abbreviated CAD. In coronary artery disease is what we see depicted in this image on the right. So these are just 4 cross sections of an artery, which is a blood vessel that carries blood from the heart out to the rest of cells throughout the body. And so this is the progression from top to bottom of heart disease, in particular coronary artery disease. So in the top picture, you see the artery, and in that sort of bottom left, you see the plaques forming in the lining of the artery. Plaque is a buildup of lots of different types of cells, including cholesterol molecules, as well as some of your inflammatory molecules. And what happens is as the plaque grows over time, if it's not, plaque can go away, but it's often developing due to what we're eating and due to a lack of physical activity. And so if we're not eating healthy nutrient-dense foods that could help to remove the plaque, and if we're not exercising enough, the plaque will just build over time if we continue to eat foods high in cholesterol and foods high in saturated fat. And so if the plaque builds and builds and builds, the first thing that happens is it starts to restrict the area. Let me see if I can get a marker here. It starts to restrict this area inside of the blood vessel where your blood would be flowing. So it's going to cause a higher blood pressure because you have now smaller space through which the blood is going to flow. And then, so that alone is problematic, causing a higher blood pressure. But then a secondary issue is that the plaque can burst. And when it bursts, it can actually form a full clot, totally obstructing blood flow. And that's when we have stroke and stroke or heart attack. Yeah, so very simple overview of heart disease. So then we can look at, you may have caught, I already mentioned a few of the dietary causes of heart disease. So sodium can be part of it. You might recall from the first lecture that we did, the dietary guidelines recommend no more than 2,300 milligrams per day. And for anyone who already has a heart disease diagnosis, it's actually 1,500 milligrams per day or less. The standard American diet provides 3,400 milligrams per day on average. So already definitely in excess of the upper limit recommendation for sodium. Sodium in the American diet primarily comes from packaged foods, processed foods, which could otherwise be classified as store-bought foods, as well as restaurant foods. So this image on the right is pretty all-encompassing for the standard American diet. Although I guess what might be missing would be like cereals and chips, things that are, as well as I guess cakes and pastries and muffins and those types of things too. So anywhere where you have sort of a preserved packaged food, you're almost guaranteed to have additional sodium, as well as additional saturated fats and cholesterol. So these images on the right are certainly going to be high in all three: sodium, saturated fat, and cholesterol. And then in terms of nutritional prevention or treatment of heart disease, effectively, we just want to do the reverse of what we just saw. So eat less of foods that are high in saturated fat and cholesterol and sodium. And so again, processed foods, as well as, I didn't put this on the previous slide, but saturated fat and cholesterol we find primarily in our animal foods. So milk and meat. We don't find really as much saturated fat and cholesterol in fish, so that's why you don't see that listed here. So foods that are high in saturated fat and cholesterol are your milk and your fatty meats, and other dairy products like butter and cheeses. Certainly, I don't think I put cheese on here. And then the sodium you're going to find certainly in the processed meats like cold cuts and salamis and hot dogs and bacon. Margarine is not really a dairy product, it's a dairy imitation product, also high in trans fat and cholesterol, so another good one to avoid. And then eat more foods that are naturally low in saturated fats. So again, not all saturated fats, but the majority of the saturated fats that are in the American diet come from animal foods. Fruits and vegetables and whole grains are virtually empty of saturated fats, as are legumes. In nuts, in certain nuts and seeds, you might find some saturated fats, but in very small amounts. And then fish, again, very small amounts of saturated fat. So they're not necessarily empty of saturated fats, but they're very low in saturated fat, especially compared to the first group of food up there. And then in addition, eat foods that are high in fiber. So foods, we know that fiber can help to reduce total cholesterol in the body. So foods that are rich in fiber are any of our plant foods. So again, your fruits, your vegetables, your whole grains, your beans, and to a lesser extent, nuts and seeds. So consuming these foods, in the recommended quantities, roughly 8 to 12 servings per day, serving being a half cup, would be an excellent source of fiber. And then, again, just maintaining good hydration. So that's upwards of 100 ounces per day for men and pretty darn close to 100 ounces per day for women. I don't ask this question for all of the following diseases, but there has been some really interesting research, not even super recently, but over the past 30 years, there's been some really good research looking at how can we really truly address heart disease through diet. And so there is one diet, the Dean Ornish diet, that has actually been shown in scientific studies to fully reverse heart disease. So the plaque that we saw a couple slides back, that plaque building up, the plaque can actually go away through a healthful diet and lifestyle. And so there's something called the Ornish Lifestyle Medicine Dietary Guidelines, and I've posted that for you to review this week. And you'll see that it's not exclusively diet, like it does also get into proper movement, getting enough exercise, but then certainly it lays out dietary guidelines that are similar, but with a few sort of specifications to what we looked at in week 1. So here's kind of the quick notes on the Ornish Lifestyle Medicine Dietary Guidelines. So eating mostly plants in their natural form, as we just saw on the previous slide, that's going to give us a lot of fiber. That's going to keep our saturated fat and cholesterol very low, as well as our sodium. Limit intake of foods that are refined carbohydrates and white flour foods. Consume 4 grams per day of healthful fats. So getting those fats from flax seeds, nuts, other seeds, and fish. So again, we're going to find minimal amounts of saturated fats here, and we're going to find higher amounts of the polyunsaturated fats in these foods. Consume mostly plant-based proteins. So again, when we're eating things like beans, nuts, seeds, lentils, we're getting protein and we're getting a lot of fiber. That just can't be possible when we eat meat or cheese, because meats and cheeses don't have any fiber. And then they do have the saturated fat, the cholesterol, and in a lot of cases, the sodium. Moderate your salt use, and then reduce intake of stimulants as well. So again, I do actually ask you to do a little bit of work with the Ornish Lifestyle Medicine Dietary Guidelines for your discussion this week. So I put the link in the folder for the week's content, but if you're interested, you can kind of click here for the guidelines, and also for, if you are kind of a research buff, you can click through the many studies that have been done looking at this way of eating and the opportunity to reverse not only heart disease, but diabetes and certain types of cancer as well. So diabetes is next. What is diabetes? Diabetes is basically high blood sugar, chronically high blood sugar. Chronic meaning that it's ongoing. And if you're not familiar with that word, I apologize because I threw it out in the beginning of the lecture too. But chronic just means ongoing. So ongoing high blood pressure that's not really dealt with, or like never has a chance to come down. We're going to look at briefly 3 types of diabetes here. As science and medicine progress, we're realizing that maybe there are even more than 3 types of diabetes as we know it. But for the time being, there's type 1 diabetes, which is effectively where your body is not either making enough insulin or not making any at all, and often characterized by the person's immune system attacking the cells in the pancreas that produce insulin. And so insulin is the hormone that helps us, it's one of the hormones that help us manage our blood sugar. And in particular, insulin's job is to respond after a meal. So when we've consumed a meal and we're getting new glucose into the body, it's insulin's job to go out to all the body cells and say, hey, open up, glucose is here. So, and then if you recall again from week 1, glucose is our primary energy substrate. So if we're not making insulin, then the body cells are going to have a hard time getting glucose into the cells because they're not even going to know that glucose is available. So that can be problematic, just leading to overall fatigue. But then the bigger problem is the chronically high blood sugar, because now you've got all this blood sugar post-meal, all this sugar after a meal in your bloodstream, and it has nowhere to go. So really it's that high blood sugar hanging out for a long time that becomes problematic. Type 2 diabetes is where the body over time eventually stops responding to insulin production, and in some cases may actually stop producing insulin. This is the more common type, and this is really the one that we call a disease of lifestyle. Type 1 diabetes generally shows up earlier in life. Both can be managed through diet and lifestyle. But type 2 diabetes now is showing up earlier in life, and this is one that's often related to the healthfulness and the diet of the mother at conception, during pregnancy, during breastfeeding, if breastfeeding at all, and during the early years of life for a person. So we see that type 2 diabetes used to be considered adult onset because it was something that only happened over a lifetime of unhealthful eating. But now we're seeing that type 2 diabetes can come about very early in life if the fetus is growing in an unhealthful environment, and if an infant is exposed very early on to added and isolated sugars. And then a third type we have is gestational diabetes. This is diabetes during pregnancy, and in best case scenario, if it's well managed, it will just go away, and the mother will return to healthy blood sugar regulation after birth. So kind of briefly before we get into nutrition and diabetes, worth noting that diabetes is also related, just like obesity, also related to other health problems. So when diabetes is poorly managed or allowed to continue as a chronic condition rather than being treated and potentially reversed, then this chronic high blood pressure can lead to things like heart disease, stroke, kidney disease, eye problems, often resulting in blindness, dental diseases, nerve damages, neuropathies, and in a lot of cases, foot problems too. So numbness, loss of function there, and then worst case scenario, even amputation of toes or even the full foot, and in some cases, the full lower limb. That image didn't come out too clearly, too bad. Dietary causes of diabetes. So again, we see diets that are high in saturated fat and cholesterol. A really important part about diabetes too is just regular consumption of excess calories. So too much food, kind of going hand in hand with weight gain or obesity, just chronic overconsumption of calories. Again, this is a disease that's related to that postprandial, meaning after we eat, how the body is able to manage glucose that we've just absorbed from our digestive organs. No matter what it is that we're eating, there's always going to be an increase in our blood sugar post ingestion. I think it's I feel like it's fairly commonly talked about, well, have a diet high in protein, have a diet high in fat if you have diabetes, but it doesn't matter. You're still going to see an increase in your blood sugar levels after you've finished a meal. So it's regular consumption of excess calories, regardless of where the calories come from. We see that red meats and processed meats are also causative in diabetes. Again, things like deli meats, hot dogs, bacon, and then certainly diets that are high in added sugars and refined carbohydrates. So it's a lot of what we see on this slide over here, your white flour pancakes, your French fries, your sodas, your potato chips, burger buns, hot dog buns. Milk isn't an added sugar, but canned fruit often has sugar added, ketchup has sugar added, bacon has sugar added, many dairy products might have sugar added. So added sugars and refined like white flour foods. So then what can we do to prevent or treat diabetes with food? In the grains department, choosing whole grains rather than the refined and the processed grains. Skip the sugary drinks and drink water instead. So again, avoiding things like sodas, even juices, keeping those to a minimum. Avoiding putting sugar in your coffee and your tea. Limit consumption of red meat and processed meats. Reduce intake of foods that are high in saturated fat, trans fat, and cholesterol. So again, we saw this when we looked at heart disease. Nothing new here. Also consume foods that are high in fiber, so fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans and lentils. And then again, often it's really a lifestyle approach to preventing and treating these diseases. So move more and do your best to maintain a healthful weight. All right, cancer. So similar to heart disease, cancer is sort of an umbrella term. There is a long list of different cancers. Effectively, what's happening in cancer is that body cells are always dividing. Old cells usually break down and literally fully break down, and then the body builds new cells to replace them. That sort of cell turnover is happening continuously throughout a person's life cycle. But what happens in cancer is that either those old cells don't actually die off and they just kind of linger on, and then when new cells are trying to form and replicate, that cell division goes on sort of unchecked. So cell division is happening ongoing without stopping, And that's where you can see the formation of tumors, is where you just have this basically uncontrolled cellular growth. Again, we see overweight and obesity are associated with the development of cancer. At least 13 types of cancers, specifically endometrial, breast, and colorectal, are associated with overweight and obesity. And these three alone make up 40% of all cancers that are diagnosed. So that doesn't even get to the other 10 cancers that are associated with overweight and obesity. So right there, almost half of cancer diagnoses are associated with excess weight. Some dietary causes of cancer. Again, on the content for this week, I share a link to the World Health Organization's list of known carcinogens and probable carcinogens. So feel free to check that out if you want much more detailed information. Non-nutritive sweeteners. Again, this is sort of the probable. This is a probable one. There hasn't been any definitive answer one way or another that non-nutritive sweeteners, these are your non-caloric sweeteners and sugar substitutes, cause cancer. What we are finding in the research, though, is that it's really dose dependent. So the more we consume non-nutritive sweeteners, the greater the risk or the likelihood of cancer development. Processed meats is a known carcinogen, according to the World Health Organization. So this is pork, beef, other red meats, poultry, and organ meats that have been processed through salting, curing, fermenting, smoking, or any combination of these. Red meat is actually I forget if it's known or probable, but again, you see beef, veal, pork, lamb, mutton, which is like grown sheep, goat, and horse. Pesticides. Glyphosate is a known carcinogen. This is pesticides and herbicides are things applied to plants as they're growing to control weeds. And again, this is a sort of a dose-dependent one. Glyphosate we find oftentimes in our grains as well as on fruits and vegetables. So choosing organic when possible is a really good, important option here, because the organic certification indicates that glyphosate cannot be used in the production or processing of a food. And then for fruits and vegetables, always wash them before eating, because you can potentially you can rinse off a lot of the residue that may be on the skin or on the surface of the fruit or the vegetable. Added sugars. So this is naturally occurring sugars, or not necessarily naturally occurring, could be naturally occurring sugars, could be non-nutritive sweeteners. But again, added, so not talking about fruit sugar and not talking about sugar that's naturally in an oat, but talking about sugar that is added into food. So like we saw on the previous slide with diabetes, the pancakes, the ketchup, the bacon, cereal products, a lot of cookies, candies, these are all added sugar. These foods all contain added sugars. Again, this is probable and dose dependent. But again, what you see here is that you're getting excess calories with no nutritional value otherwise. So it's not like you're getting also vitamins or also healthy fats or fiber. You're getting just the sugar. So it's leading to that excessive caloric intake. And then alcohol, known carcinogens again, in particular the ethanol and the acetaldehyde that exist in alcohols. And then this one is interesting. So high dose of vitamin supplementation, in particular vitamin A and vitamin E, are potentially causative. So for these nutrients, it's really important to either be very mindful of the supplementation if you do take these as supplements, but best recommendation is to just consume these via whole foods, because there is no relationship to these nutrients and cancer or to the causation of cancer when they're consumed in whole foods. So we know, in fact, actually, that vitamin E is a really important nutrient to help prevent cancer or treat cancer, but best to get it in food, not supplementation. So what can we do to prevent and treat cancer with food? Phytochemicals, remember from week 1, these are just basically plant chemicals, so other nutrients that are in plants that are important to the plant health that we know human bodies can also use. Again, with phytochemicals, best to just get them by eating whole food, not through supplementation. Soy food products, I guess, can be a way to reduce cancer risk and also to treat cancer. Certainly through traditional soy products like tofu or tempeh or miso, and we're not talking about, again, sort of supplementation like isolated soy proteins. Soy food has been shown to be potentially productive in reducing risk of breast cancer, prostate cancer, and endometrial cancers. And then fruits and vegetables, of course. This is where we're going to get the bulk of our vitamins and our minerals and our other phytochemicals. Again, best to consume fruits and vegetables as whole foods and not as, like dehydrated vegetable powders in your pasta or something. Maybe just make a stir fry of vegetables and add it to your pasta. Whole grain pasta, of course. And then a vegetarian diet, again, has been shown to work to reduce severity of cancer and even potentially prevent cancer, but again, only when consumed a healthy vegetarian diet, right? Because Oreos and potato chips and French fries could be a vegetarian diet, but it's not a healthful one. So again, consuming whole unprocessed foods. And if a vegetarian diet is done well with whole foods, supplementation of these 4 nutrients is most likely not necessary, but it's worth considering iron, zinc, calcium, and B12 on a vegetarian diet. In particular, the B12 and the iron, but those are 4 nutrients that may be of concern on a vegetarian diet. Vitamin D, also really important for prevention and treatment of cancer. This is generally something, again, we're making on our skin, so not something we typically actually eat in our food. I didn't put it here, but vitamin D we make when our skin is exposed to sunlight, and at least at the latitude where we are in New York, I think it's either 40 degrees north or 43 degrees north latitude. Above that latitude, during basically October to March, the sun never gets high enough to promote vitamin D production. So during those winter months, it's worth supplementing with vitamin D, but the rest of the year, March through October, ideal to get at least 15 minutes of sunlight exposure in the midday sun, so roughly between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. And then vitamin C also can have very powerful anti-cancer properties, but again, when consumed in food, not as a supplement. So again, fruits and vegetables is your best place for vitamin C. And then this could be said for all of the above, not just cancer, but again, remembering that healthy eating is important throughout the life cycle. So it's not like, let's eat healthy for one day. It's like, let's eat healthy as sort of the general practice. So kind of at a more public health level, it would be worth promoting healthful eating practices for everyone. Again, breastfeeding moms, so for the moms themselves to be following a healthy diet, but also to encourage breastfeeding, encourage healthful eating for children in childcare centers, as well as the workers in childcare settings. Workplaces that offer food to their employees would be a great place to offer healthy food, and also making healthy food options not only available, but also convenient for purchase and affordable would be ideal. And then again, increasing physical activity is a major component of all of these treatments and preventions. So again, kind of more of a public health approach, but making sure that there are sidewalks accessible in neighborhoods, making sure that parks are accessible, and making sure that people feel safe to play outside and be active in their neighborhood. So the last one we'll look at in this presentation is Alzheimer's disease. So Alzheimer's, again, really brief, very brief pathophysiology here. Alzheimer's disease is just a slowly progressing dementia characterized by cognitive decline, memory lapse, and behavioral changes. So just some risk factors to look at. First, worth noting, Alzheimer's disease, anyone who has hypercholesterolemia, anyone who is overweight or obese, people who have very sedentary lifestyles, someone who's already diagnosed with hypertension, someone who has elevated homocysteine levels, and anyone who fits the metabolic syndrome diagnosis. All of these, or any one of these, increases a person's risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. So some dietary considerations in the development. Again, may or may not be fully causative in the case of Alzheimer's, but certainly increasing a person's risk for development. So again, we see saturated fat, trans fat, and cholesterol, which again is coming primarily from meat and dairy products, or almost exclusively in the case of cholesterol, and then your processed foods as well, your processed meats and your processed foods. Again, we see excessive caloric intake, low fiber diets. So again, this is coming from any diet that's really high in meat and dairy at the exclusion of other foods is going to be a low fiber diet, because meat and dairy don't provide fiber. But anything that's also high in white grains, refined grains, you're going to see it's going to be low fiber as well, because while grains themselves, whole grains, are really rich sources of fiber, when they're refined and processed, the fiber is removed. Alcohol, and again, any diet that's excessive in alcohol is often at the expense of other foods that could be rich in fiber. And any of these above, so foods that are high in saturated fat, trans fat, and cholesterol, refined grains, and alcohol are all nutritionally poor foods. So excessive consumption of any of these is naturally going to be low in micronutrients, vitamins, and minerals. So we find these 6 micronutrients to be, or 7, I guess, micronutrients to be really critical in the progression of Alzheimer's disease: vitamin A, vitamin E, vitamin B12, vitamin C, folate, and vitamin D. So what can we do to treat Alzheimer's? Again, effectively the opposite. So if any of these other conditions are present, manage them. So we talked about diabetes. We've been talking about obesity sort of subliminally through all of this. Hypercholesterolemia, having high cholesterol levels, and hypertension, having the high blood pressure. Again, refer to the slides on heart disease. So we've in a way touched on all of these. Again, of course, reduce intake of saturated trans fat and cholesterol foods, maintaining a healthful weight. Consume nutrient-rich foods. So consume foods that are going to give you vitamin C, vitamin E, vitamin A, B12, and folate. And again, these nutrients are primarily coming from your fruits and your vegetables. Vitamin E we find like in the avocado, and we find in almonds and pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds. Folate we find pretty, not exclusively, but it's the most dense in our green leafy vegetables. Whole grains is an excellent source of our B vitamins. And B12, really what we understand about B12 is that it's actually a vitamin that's produced by bacteria that live in soil. And so, you know, if you want to grow some of your own food and keep very healthy soil, odds are you're going to be in contact with B12. You know, if little specks of dirt make it onto your food. Of course, if we're buying commercially grown fruits and vegetables, you know, earlier I just said wash them to remove potential herbicides and pesticides. So when we do that, when we do excessively wash our fruits and vegetables, we're getting rid of that potential for B12 intake. So it's sort of a, how do you say, not totally a catch-22, but we kind of have to wash them to remove the pesticide residue, but then that's at the expense of B12. So B12 may need to be supplemented. And then again, of course, moderate alcohol consumption or avoid alcohol consumption. And again, the vitamin D is something that we're producing on our skin from March through October. So late spring on through kind of middle of fall. And then lastly, I just thought I would list numerous other diseases that also have a strong foundation in diet and lifestyle. So AIDS and HIV, although obviously a very strong viral factor, a healthy diet and definitely a healthy diet and certainly movement can be very critical for at least prolonging the lifetime of someone diagnosed with HIV or AIDS. A lengthy list of digestive disorders. We could have spent the entire lecture actually just talking about digestive disorders. You have any irritable bowel disorders, your celiac disease, your Crohn's disease, constipation and diarrhea, indigestion, GERD or acid reflux, I said constipation, diverticulitis, pancreatitis, stomach ulcers. All of these have a very strong food relation, as of course these are diseases of our digestive organs. And then eating disorders is actually kind of looking on the reverse side, because obviously in an eating disorder like anorexia nervosa or bulimia, a person is not getting in enough nutrition. So that's kind of thinking about it from the reverse direction, because in those cases we need to bring nutrients back in a slow and careful manner. Well, and actually, sorry, let me say that's also somewhat true of all those digestive disorders too. Because generally the digestive disorders are arising from prolonged intake of very unhealthy and very damaging foods. So where an eating disorder might be prolonged intake of not enough foods, in both cases the digestive organs actually weaken and may begin to malfunction. And so treating those diseases has to be a little bit slower and more deliberate through the nutrition approach compared to something like heart disease or diabetes, where the digestive organs more or less are still functioning, so we can kind of just change up the nature of the food. In these cases where the digestive organs are malfunctioning, a lot of times you want to start back in with a more liquid diet, a broth-based diet, soft foods, and slowly progress a person back to eating more whole foods, particularly with the digestive disorders, because in a lot of those cases, a person won't do well with fiber initially, but truly that's what they actually need, but they have to kind of have a slow, steady progression back to consuming them regularly. And then I have food allergies and intolerances, and then osteoporosis is also certainly osteoporosis or rickets certainly related to bone formation, and of course diet has a strong role too in how well bones are formed. So that's it for this lecture, and again you'll see there's some readings posted for this week, some required readings and some optional readings. Thanks.